Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rift Rewind and ESPN Esports League of Legends program. Art Ocal, Jacob Wolf, Tyler Erzberger, Emily Rand. Normally, we would have a regularly scheduled episode for you. We would be talking about the LCS, the LEC, the LCK. Emily would be talking about the LPL, and it would be a great show. But guess what? We don't have any leagues to talk about. We don't even have an MSI to talk about. Of course, we know by now that MSI is not happening. But what we're going to do on this program is we're going to envision if MSI were still taking place and what that would look like and which teams would go far in the tournament and which teams would stumble, which teams would have an impressive showing, which ones would go home crying tears into their hands. We're going to break it down as if MSI was happening, play a little fantasy because we know you love that in the chat. You got any questions for our esteemed panel throughout the entire show? Feel free to throw them in the chat. I have it open. The first thing we got to talk about, ladies and gents, however, is the very predictable news that Team Liquid has a new coach. We all saw this coming. Years and years of foundations have been built. And yes, Jat is your new head coach of Team Liquid. Emily, why did this happen?
I mean, if you think about it, so like I also was shocked, but if you think about it, he doesn't really have a lot to lose. I think he can always go back to casting. I hadn't thought about the monetary aspect until I discussed it on Twitter with Loco, but it probably
Well,
does
give credit where it's due.
it.
I brought it up first. You guys just sort of had your side conversation
Well,
without me
because
after the fact, but it's okay.
I didn't even think about money. I was more thinking about like casting just generally, in my opinion, has kind of a finite ceiling where like you can either decide that you want to like perfect your casting and you're really super into casting and you want to be the best caster ever, or you're going to use it as a springboard to do something else, become a general manager, become a coach, etc. But like I think regardless of what happens, he's actually in a really good position where he has like very little to lose and a lot to gain.
I actually disagree on that. I don't. I mean, yeah, I'm sure he could go back to Riot, but do you really think Riot, after he went to the game dev team, then decided to go back to casting, and then they gave him, this or that back, and they slowly gave him more responsibility for him to then jump away again? If he comes back to casting, you can't trust him to be, one of your lead casters. Or I actually do think Jet is giving up a lot by going through this. I don't think it's the wrong choice, but I do think I do think there's definitely a downside if this all goes sideways, right? Riot's not just going to welcome him back and give him a hero's welcome like last time if he has to come back, if this all fails. He left them, in the middle of the split when he's, a big part of their show, and I'm sure they're very happy for Jat, but I don't agree that if, this all fails, that they're just going to roll the red carpet back like when he did with the game dev shift, right? Like, you can't trust someone or have them be your ace caster or put them, as a profile person when they've left twice already. So I actually do disagree that there's no downside to this. Like, he needs to do well. Like, it's not like he can just switch right back to casting League of Legends, LCS, if this all goes sideways. It's going to be different.
I was definitely surprised.
Because I think he's popular enough, like how they brought back Deficio for the analyst desk, and I know that kind of annoyed a lot of people. But I think he's actually popular enough that it ultimately won't matter. I'm sorry.
First, they didn't bring him back. I said they wouldn't put him as one of their, leading people. Like, yes, he could be on the analyst desk, but I don't think they're going to give him and put him in positions to be the main caster of the LCS.
I agree. I agree a little bit with Tyler in the sense that like JLXP and things like that they were this or that they were building around him, right? Like he was probably their best, I would think, in my opinion, he was probably their best on-air talent. I don't think that that's a stretch. Like I think Flowers is pretty good. I think there are others on that broadcast too who are pretty solid. But I think that overall he was very well-rounded, I guess is what I would say. Like he was a good podcast host. He was a solid podcast host. He was a solid analyst on various different shoulder programming content. And he also was a good caster still. So I think that I don't know. I think that it is hard to invest in someone like that. But I do agree that there's a higher financial upside for him in being a coach.
I would. That's what I was gonna say. There was. I bet you that the economics are in Jat's favor going to Team Liquid as a coach as opposed to staying as a caster. Jay Moriarty in the chat wrote, "Casters come and go. It's not that big of a deal, right?" See, that paradigm needs to change. Casters need to have more value placed upon them, and there is that sort of feeling among people that casters are expendable. A very rare few, whether it's a play-by-play, color, whatever, a very rare few reach that level where they feel indispensable. And honestly, where else was Jat going to go beyond where he was? Like, what would have been the next career step for Jat as a caster?
Well, it depends on like if Riot would have let him become an executive, right? That feels like the only track, and maybe that's not what he wants, right? Like, I don't think that, and someone who works in media, as someone who works in media, right? Like, it's not everybody wants to go the like executive route, right? Where it becomes all planning and not content creation. It's fun to create content, right? And so I think for him, I wouldn't be surprised to see if he was still doing some content around Liquid. Obviously, 1UP is a huge part of the Axiomatic portfolio, and that's the ownership group of Team Liquid. So I certainly could see a world where he is also doing that as a part of the coaching role, and contributing to some of that more generally. And maybe he has a future there, right? Maybe this isn't for him. Maybe he doesn't like being a coach, but maybe he sticks around like 1UP and helps them build more content. And still, I still think that financially puts him ahead more than Riot would long term.
So we just wanted to scratch the surface on this topic. We're going to have a lot more content surrounding Jat and Team Liquid a little bit later on, hoping that we land an interview at some point with Emily. You can look forward to that in the near future. But the reason we are here today on the Rift Rewind is we're imagining, we are creating a fictional scenario. All four of us had the chance to fill out a hypothetical bracket for MSI. If MSI were to actually happen, how would it look? And we all have differing opinions. Actually, we're sort of in teams, it seems, as you will see. But I think we should just go into it and talk about who had what where. We're going to start with the different phases, of course. Let's start with the teams involved. I think I'm the only one that differed on which teams would actually be at MSI, Emily, right?
Yeah, so I think most people are kind of making the assumption that it would be Team Flash and Talon Esports as the final two teams. However, obviously, like we're not going to go through the minor region bracket, and we also.
So there are my picks right there.
Yeah, none of us are Vietnamese or Taiwanese league experts. However, you have a vested interest in Turkey due to heritage. So I think despite the fact that they have not won the Turkish finals yet.
I'm just assuming that they will win the TCL winter season. So assuming that this happens, we're going to have Fenerbahce making a surprise appearance at my MSI. And I know that the chat's saying there's some audio issues. Jacob, we just need you to go all the way to the other side of the room, if you don't mind, away from your microphone, and I think we'll be fine. I think that
I'm fixing myself right now. That's why I know that they like probably see me mouthing and
now
like,
I'm too loud.
I'm muted on Discord. Look, guys, I just moved across the country. I drove 26 hours and 36 hours. My brain is fried. I'm trying. Bear with me, chat, please.
I mean, you even have a bare wall behind you. You don't even have anything set up right now.
I know. I have a desk. It's lovely.
Okay, let's take a look at some of the other teams. So you showed mine. Let's show the other ones as well. I think the other three had the exact same teams, at least going into the into MSI. Here's Emily's right now. So as you would expect, winners of the regions. We have our 6 here. Emily's is going to come up any second, and there it is. And you, instead of Fenerbahce, have Talon Esports as part of the as our.
So yeah, I agree that if any other team would slot in, it would be the Turkish team probably. Whoever wins the Turkish final, which again hasn't happened yet. But I'm still betting on Talon Esports and Team Flash. Team Flash, I'm actually wondering, like, am I too hard on them because I didn't have them doing well in group round robin in this, as you might see from my ranking. But I unfortunately don't know enough about the Vietnamese or Taiwanese scenes to really give like a definitive analytical breakdown of either of these teams. So I don't want to like step out of line and be like, oh, I definitely think that such and such team would do super well, because I honestly don't know. The thing that people should know about Talon is that it's like Hanabi, Candy, Unified, Kaiwing. Like there's a lot of prior LMS players or people who have played in the LMS, like Candy and River, both South Korean, that you might be familiar with. Basically, they just took most of the remaining talent that didn't go to LPL, like Fofo, and a few others before they joined the PCS, and this is the best team that ended up winning PCS. And then I know even less about Team Flash, to be honest, outside of the fact that I do believe it was somewhat of an upset that they beat, not a massive one, but I do think it was somewhat of an upset that they beat GAM to win the BCS.
So let's take a look at the group stage. So obviously we all know by now that MSI was originally moved to July. It was canceled on April 23rd. Very unfortunate, but of course we live in extraordinary times. So let's take a look at the group format. Tyler, we're going to start with your group. We're going to take a second and show everybody what your group stage looked like. So just to set the table for everybody watching right now, all 4 of us predicted group stage winners for every single match, and then moved on to the playoff format. We all picked semifinal and final winners. So we're going to go in order. So this is the order in which you picked, Tyler. You shockingly have T1 as your number 1 seed going out of the group stage. I love you're just like, what? Shocking. Come on. Shocking. Hey, by the way, I found out that I have the same birthday as Faker today, which is great.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I know. It's a goated birthday is what it is. So why do you have this list, Tyler?
This list, so the bottom 2 teams, Vietnam and the Pacific region, just going by years and years of data. I mean, I'm sure Vietnam would upset G2 sometime in this tournament.
Actually did put them going 1-1 G2.
Yeah, it's tradition now. I think we've had enough international competitions where I don't think the PCS, especially that roster, is strong enough to compete with the top 4. And I do think the top 4, and I do put C9 in that top 4. I don't think it's like last year where it was kind of 3 big teams and then TL was just kind of on the outside in purgatory between, the minor regions and the big regions. I do think C9 should be included in the top 4, though I do think they are the 4th best team of those 4. I do think they're all pretty flawed teams, and I'm actually very sad that MSI isn't happening because I think all 4 of these teams could win in a perfect world. I do think C9 does have the talent and coaching staff to actually win an MSI with these 4 teams, these 4 champions in the field. I picked T1 because I actually do think they are in the best form right now. Faker is locked in. From everything that I've heard about T1, talk to, Joe Marsh, the CEO of T1, just how Faker and everyone on that team is working right now. They're all in sync. Faker has really evolved as a player. You might not see it on Summoner's Rift, but outside of the Rift, becoming more of a team leader, kind of, bringing the next generation of T1 stars like Kana, for example. He's really grooming these players into being really great players. He's more than just, that player on the Rift who carries with his kills and his assists and everything now. He's actually bringing that outside the game. He's becoming more of a leader figure, which from all of us who've met Faker before and interviewed him before, he's a very introverted, quiet fellow. So I actually really like this T1 team. And although I don't think they're far and away the best team at MSI, and I do think they have some weaknesses, especially in the early game, that can be exploited if a team can snowball on them. And I do think like a team like G2 could. I actually do think T1 would come on top in the group stage. Of all these teams, I trust T1 the most, even though they're all flawed.
I actually also had T1 coming out on top in the group stage because I think they would.
Well,
come
let's
out with
take
the
a
best
look at
record.
your bracket again.
I can never trust like a Chinese as much as like IG and RNG. So IG last year in the group stage, and then RNG in 2016 surprised me. I can never trust a Chinese team to do super well in best of ones. I still think that I had them coming out as the second seed with a tiebreaker with G2. But yeah, I don't trust them not to drop games, and I trust T1 more not to drop best of ones.
So you had T1, G2, JD Gaming, and Cloud9 as your top four who would advance from the group stage. Okay, let's take a look at Jacob's group stage results. And Jacob, you and I aligned at least partially as we get further along in this tournament. But how did you approach this group stage?
For maybe the first time ever, I think I have more faith in China than Emily Rand. Let that be on the record.
Faith in China.
I actually believe JDG could be the better group stage kick here. As you'll see probably later on, I don't think that they would win the entire tournament. But I do think that right now, like if MSI were to start right now, I think that they are in maybe them and T1, I think, are among the most consistent of these teams. I feel at least. And look, I know like C9 had a really good playoff, but I also don't think North America spot. Debate that all day. I think that the competition for them is pretty low. But nonetheless, yeah, I actually do think JDG in the way that they play. I was really impressed with them playing the LPL playoff. So I think that they would advance out. And yeah, I don't know. I guess maybe the most surprising thing on my top four here would be that T1 is third. Because I do think that G2 is actually and you'll see later. I don't want to spoil the next part of my bracket, but you'll see that I actually have a lot of faith in G2 overall. I think that I don't like seeing them in group. I wouldn't like seeing this team in a group form, just because I think we've seen them be a little hit or miss, but I do think they are still very good.
Well, they went 5-5 in last year's group stage, right? G2? Or am I?
I believe so. Yeah,
yeah.
They lost twice.
So yeah, that's like not a bad I see G2 as kind of in the same vein that I see JDG. Well, maybe that's why I had them together, like tie and having to do a tiebreaker because yeah, like I can definitely see them dropping single games.
Just to catch everybody up, you are correct. G2 placed third in the group stage. They went 5-5. They ended with 3 losses, but they still made it to the playoffs. They defeated IG in the semifinals, and then obviously Team Liquid in the All-West final. But yeah, Invictus was first at 9-1, SK Telecom T1 7-3, and then Team Liquid was 4-6, but they still made it through. Let me ask you this, Emily. Of the 2 minor region teams, even throw Fenerbahce, just make it 3. Okay, give me a little bit of hope here. Make a case for any of those teams. How would they be able to get through? How would they be able to make it? Because we all predicted they wouldn't, but how would they have done it?
I mean, they'd have to take single games off of. So, like, I think if you're looking at these teams and you're like, okay, who are you going to take a single game off of? I think most people would say C9 because they're slotted in 4th. They come from the worst major region, like competitively. I don't think that's like a stretch to say. I don't think that's a hot take. However, the problem is they would, like, putting C9 aside, they would have to take single games off of the likes of G2, JDG, and T1. I see T1 actually doing really well in this group stage. I think if the team is going to have trouble, it's actually going to come later on in best of 5s, not in a single game like round robin. So that leaves JDG and G2, both of which are actually incredibly volatile teams. So what would have to happen is that one of those minor region teams would have to upset like both of them in a consistent way, and also beat C9 as well in order to make it out. And thus far, MSI is such a like it typically doesn't support that outside of Flash Wolves historically, because there's only one team per region, and it's usually definitively the best team of that region. So you don't get the same kind of volatility that you like. Single games are already pretty volatile, but you don't get the same volatility that you get when you pit different seeds against each other at Worlds, because there's only one team per region. So I actually think it would be quite difficult.
I kind of want to have a little bit of a discussion here about how relevant MSI is as like a barometer of overall like regional competition, right? That's like what it's supposed to be in the sense that like Worlds is supposed to be who is the best team in the world, where I feel like MSI is much more of a what is the best region in the world by sending their best representative. Like a little bit more of this feels like a little bit more of like a global rift rival in a sort of way in its current iteration. And I'm kind of curious if you all feel, and for my personal opinion, I don't think that it's a good sort of barometer, but do you think that it actually shows what teams will be strong or what regions will be strong come World? Or do you think that like 4 months makes a giant?
I think it teaches teams what they need to work on. I think a lot of times, if you're Team Liquid, for example, you go to MSI, you learn a lot, and the hope is that you would bring back what you learned from MSI and the gaps between where you are and the other regions are, the region champions are, and then you bring that back and you can help your region kind of prep for Worlds. I think MSI is fine. I do agree that it's not, Worlds is by far the biggest thing, where if a team wins MSI and then loses the World Championship like G2's happy that they had a really good year where they won 3 big championships, but they can't celebrate it, like, right? It's Worlds or bust. It's why Samsung White, even though Samsung White never won a domestic title, never won an MSI, they're still seen as one of the greatest teams of all time because they won Worlds. They turned it on when it mattered. Worlds is the end-all be-all. So I do agree that MSI right now is a barometer. I think it's a fine barometer. I think it's a fine tournament. I'm always excited to go and to cover it. But I do feel like there could be, I do wish there was more barometers. I wish there was not just, MSI. I wish there was maybe another international tournament thrown into the mix where you have, 2 MSIS tournaments and then a world championship. But I'll take what I can have. Riot, if we complain about this, Riot might just take it away and just be like, you get 1 Worlds a year, you get 1 international tournament.
Yeah, that's what
I'll take what I have. I'll take what I can get.
I heard a proposal. I was going to say, like, I heard a proposal a couple of years ago that was like, just abolish spring split and make like the first 6 months of the calendar like all open tournaments, international.
They'll never do, because
LPL
is too successful.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's also from a revenue perspective, right? Like that eliminates it eliminates a ton of it eliminates a ton of viewing hours that they can sell against, right? And that's the big thing, is that like every single region needs to be able to sell against it from a financial perspective of like, we have this many hours of competition that we can place your State Farm ad on, right? Like that's what they need, and so I think that's like, that would be the financial case against it. But I think from a raw competition perspective, I would love to see like 3 or 4 tournaments in the beginning of the year, like international tournaments at the beginning of the year. Then everybody goes back to their domestic region, plays their summer split, and then goes.
I think the best we might get is that we might get, they might push, the spring split to start in February, and then January you get a kickoff international tournament. Like they have a beginning of the year tournament, a mid-season invitational, then Worlds. I think that is doable, and I think that would be where Riot would go is, Rift Rivals is gone, so they can now, you have a little bit more, room to play with in the schedule. So I would hope that they'd be like, okay, all these new rosters are out. There's a lot of eyes on all these teams. Let's have like a preseason international tournament, and then name it ever you want. And then you have
PSI. You already gave it the name. We have MSI, and now we have PSI, the preseason invitational.
Preseason invitational, sure. Do it that,
You just named it.
PSI. The PSI, do that. That's the kickoff of the season. You can, you can blow it out as like this is the kickoff to the season 11, season 12, season 13, season of League of Legends. Then we at least have 3 tournaments. I think 2 right now is too little. I think 3, still not the best. I would still love, third-party tournaments up till the summer split and then, get into the season format and then have Worlds. But we're not going to get that because there's too many sponsors. LPL has more sponsors than every esports combined. It's too much money to just throw away. So obviously we're always going to have spring and summer splits. But let's have the PSI. I'd love to have 3 tournaments a year.
So
in terms of
go ahead, Emily. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, Jacob initially asked, does MSI give a good barometer of, regional strength? And I actually don't think it can because there's only 1 team per region. I don't think, say C9 went to this tournament and did, really, really well, because they are a good team. I don't think that reflects a depth of North America. No offense.
Especially this split.
And similarly to if G2 wins, right? I think you take a look at the drop off after G2 and you kind of still have to, or the drop off after G2 and Fnatic, depending on how you feel about Fnatic, despite the fact that they had kind of a rough finals against G2. And then, even in China, teams are hyper focused on their own specific play style. So even if JDG won this, I think you could say that LPL is the best region, but not because JDG won MSI, if that makes sense.
So if you look at MSI results in the final versus Worlds results in the final, basically every year, and I know that SKT was a part of the first 3 MSI finals. They won 2 of them, and they were part of Worlds finals those same years. But every year, pretty much every country that made the final almost also makes Worlds. So I agree with Emily that that's maybe more indicative of the team itself than the region itself, but that is a pretty good barometer there. Now, it's not every winner each time, obviously. G2 is a great example of that. RNG, a Chinese team, did win Worlds, but it wasn't RNG that won MSI. But the correlation is still there. What's that, sorry, Emily?
It was the opposite. RNG won MSI, IG won.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. So RNG won MSI and Invictus won Worlds, but it was still
China.
2 Chinese teams.
Well,
Exactly.
actually, though, the 2 you could make the argument against MSI because of what happened in 2018, right? The strongest North American teams were not and North American and European teams were not Cloud9 and Fnatic consistently throughout the year. Yet those are the ones that made the semifinals, right? IG.
I thought IG were gonna lose in quarters.
Yeah, everybody was betting their chips on RNG that year, right? And so
they should have lost to KT. KT con. They should.
But that's the point, right? That's the point. Is those teams didn't go to MSI, and they certainly weren't Fnatic was closer to G2 than Fnatic was closer to G2 that year than Cloud9 was to Liquid throughout the year at least, but. Yeah, that would be the argument against MSI. It's neither of those teams went to MSI, and both made it pretty far in the World Championship. Fnatic in the final and C9 in the semi.
Last question before we reveal our semifinals in our fictional 2020 MSI. Would you add more teams to MSI?
I would, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I'd want at least 2 from all of the 4 major regions.
More teams better. As many teams as humanly possible. As many teams.
Would you just make it a Worlds then? Would you just add that many teams? Would you just say, hey, give us 4 teams a region? Or would you still want to make it smaller because you want Worlds to remain important with the most teams in an international tournament?
I would have 2.
I would make more teams, but I think Riot would do the latter. I think Riot always wants Worlds to be the tournament, and that is often at odds with having another major international event.
Yes.
Fair enough.
They definitely don't want to have the Counter-Strike system, right? That's the
majors, the 2.
They try to straddle that fine line between CS and Dota, where Dota only has one tournament that people in the mainstream care about all the time, and Counter-Strike has like the 2, and then they have like so many revolving leagues throughout the year. Riot has always tried to make like MSI relevant enough, but never enough to supersede Worlds.
Jacob, your counterpart in chat says, no, that would make Worlds less relevant. You agree?
Yeah, I do agree with him. I think that I would increase the team count and maybe have a more fun format in a qualifier before the main event. So like qualify more teams into the qualifier, but don't make it where it's like 3+ for the major regions every single time like it is. Maybe like 2 for the major regions. I don't know. I do think that adding one more tournament earlier in the year and then sort of having a little bit of fun with MSI could be good, rather than it just be like a winner takes all tournament that like all the best teams come to.
I guess this isn't a spoiler anymore because it's not happening, but they were changing the format to MSI. The format was changing. I believe it was supposed to be like 3-4 team groups, I believe, something like that. Yeah, it was supposed to be more group play. All 12 region champions were supposed to play at MSI this year. Like they were all going to be playing against each other in like a group stage, and so you would see Japan versus G2 and everything like that. So the format would have been different.
So when MSI does come back in the future, would you prefer that format or the old format?
I'm fine with the format they were going to try. At least try it once. I mean, they were going to try it this year. Obviously, they couldn't, sadly. So I would like to see them do the 12 regions, put 4 teams in, or I think it was supposed to be like 2 groups of 6 or 3 groups of 4. I want to see more international play, even if Japan has no chance of beating JDG, or if the Brazilian team has a little chance of beating SKT. I want to see that. It's unfair, right? Like if you're a Brazilian fan and you're a Kaboom fan, you want to see your team play against Faker. You want to see them play against Kings.
Exactly.
But you just want to see them play as many international games as possible.
Exactly.
You want to see them play against the best.
This is like the tournaments that happen in soccer leagues, right? Like the English FA Cup, for example, like tier 2 teams playing Premier League teams. You won't see that in the regular season, but in these tournaments, you have the opportunity for these Cinderella runs. What if that Brazilian team suddenly gets hot at the right time and goes off of that momentum, and suddenly you're seeing this miraculous run in this tournament that you may have never seen if they weren't.
I mean, even if they're remotely competitive, right? Like it gives you a little bit of hope as a fan. Like they could still lose out in the end, but like as long as they like held their own at least a little bit and just didn't get completely steamrolled, like that gives you a little bit of pride.
It's the reason why Vietnam is now seen as like the 5th best region, or up there now, is because Vietnam hasn't made a semifinal or really made a
Gigabyte Marines, baby.
Gigabyte Marines
at MSI. That was the run.
These teams are making those runs who are upsetting G2 and upsetting these big teams. I think I'm very excited for the new format when a Brazilian team or a Japanese team or an Oceanic team will have the chance to have similar chances, right? It's League of Legends. It's a game. No one's perfect. No one's immortal. They're not machined. Anyone can be beaten. Kaboom beat Alliance. There's always chances for upsets, and more chances for upsets is good for everyone.
All I'm saying is I can't wait for an Oceanic team to make a deep run so that LCS teams can just poach all their talent.
Well, it's already happening. Even
it's already happened.
They're poaching their talent. They're poaching their casters. I mean, what are they going to come for next?
What else is
poach
left?
Their coaches. Like, yeah.
Goodness.
What else is there less to take after you take coaches, casters, and players?
Let's take a look at our semifinal brackets. So let's see who moves on to our fictional MSI final. Jacob, we're going to start with you. You had a very similar breakdown to me, actually, going into the semifinals. Let's see who you had advancing, and then you can explain why. We will see momentarily. And there it is. Oh, boy. How about that? You have a lot of faith in JD Gaming.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they are marginally better than Cloud9. I want to go back to something I said on Rift Rewind a few weeks ago, and the fact that, like, I don't think we have seen Cloud9 truly tested. I think that JD Gaming would be one to test them. I do think it would be a really close series, and I'm taking the 3-2 cop-out on that. But I think the more, I guess, surprising part of that image was that I had G2 Esports 3-1 over T1. And I say that because I actually think G2 is really damn good when they click on. The biggest disparity, and this has been the biggest question mark if there was an MSI this year, is like how does Caps handle himself against international AD carries? Don't know the answer to that, and we won't get to see the answer for that for a while. We may not get to see it at all, actually, if they make the role swap back. We will see. But I mean, like, that's the big thing for me. I think this G2 team is very good, potentially as good as the team that we saw in the World Finals last year. I want to see more before we see that, but I don't know. I do think that there's a world where they could have beaten T1 if that's what we ended up getting to.
I feel like that's not a stretch, especially based on like watching those two teams face each other last year, right? Because like G2 beat them at MSI, and then they beat them again. So I mean,
but like, how much does the change hurt or help G2? I think that's the biggest question all of us.
Yeah, I mean,
have
with G2 going up against T1, I think T1 right now are playing like a very, I guess, kind of like classic T1 style, and by that I mean
counterpunching.
They are like kind of reserving themselves, but they're also focusing, in my opinion, more on mid jungle and then top side of the map, and kind of letting bot lane, not like leaving them out on an island, but in terms of the way they play, they kind of just they can go even, they can go a little bit of ahead, and they're basically waiting for them to start like skirmishing mid game.
That actually would benefit G2, right? Because we've seen teams who have beaten G2 put a lot of bot lane pressure onto Caps and Mickey, right? Like the ones who with the jungler, right, or with a roaming mid. So I actually do think that sort of the Kuza's pathing could really sort of help G2 if he's going to path up top. I actually think Wonder's fine. I think he can play safe and not take a hard gank, right? And so I do think that G2, I don't know. I want to know. I want to know the answer to that question. How much did this help or hurt them with the role swap to put Caps? Will they stick with this, right? Will they stick with it as we head into summer split? Would they have done it at MSI? You would presume that they would have stuck with it at MSI.
MSI would have been a good place to test it, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Jacob, out of curiosity, like who did you have first? JDG, and then you had them picking C9 as the.
Correct.
You had them coming out first in groups and then picking C9. Okay. I was trying to figure out like why our brackets didn't match up, because I don't have T1 and G2 going up against each other, but I actually also would have picked G2.
So let's take
T1.
Emily. Let's take
one and four, and 2 and 3.
Okay.
Let's look at Emily's semifinal bracket, and you can break it down for us.
Oh yeah, so I had T1 coming out first in the group stage. I had them picking C9, who I had coming out fourth in the group stage. I actually had C9 taking one game from T1. I think if they just go full out, like super crazy aggressive early and pick one of these team compositions that we've seen them kind of trying out, especially towards the latter half of the LCS split, I think that they can definitely take a game off of T1, because T1 are like I think they're playing really, really, really well right now, but I also think they're playing like a very kind of classic style that has been studied and that does have counters. But yeah, I had C9 taking game, but I had T1 3-1. And then I had JDG beating G2 3-2. I think this would be an insanely sloppy series. I think there would be a lot of craziness. JDG actually surprised me a bit in their finals, where I actually don't think we saw them go aggressive early as often as I thought they would. They didn't draft for early game as much as I thought they would, which was kind of counter to what we saw from them in season, where I thought they had a really strong early game. The one game where they really, really went like, oh man, we're going full out early, they threw horrifically at Baron. It was game 3, I believe. They basically like handed the game to Top. Yeah, they handed the game to Top Esports, despite the fact that was like their best early game showing. So I think this would be very back and forth. The reason why I'm picking JDG is because I do think that when these two teams go up against each other, the mismatches that you're looking at are you're looking at what Zoom and Kanavi want to do versus what G2 are going to try to do off of Perk's pressure more than anything. In my opinion, like obviously they do try to focus somewhat on getting Caps ahead because Caps has a really insane understanding of just general like laning basics, right? Like minion control and stuff like that. Those issues haven't been his bot lane issues. They've more been around like some certain matchups and positioning and stuff like that. I do have JDG coming out on top. I just think that they should, if they play more like what I saw from them in season, it would also require Zoom not looking super bad on TPs, which he did in the finals, which also surprised me. I think this JDG team is just very fun. They can be very aggressive early, despite the fact that Kanavi typically does prefer some scaling jungle picks. And yeah, I mean, it would be interesting, and I think it would be incredibly sloppy. And I think it'd be fun. It'd be a fun watch. This would be like more than anything, more than any other matchup, I would want to see the G2 JDG matchup.
Sometimes you prefer watching a slugfest over a boxing masterpiece. So I like what you're putting down there, Emily.
One thing that I wanted to like point out with your bracket is like the T1 C9 matchup and the hypothetical that would happen. As we were like sort of walking through this idea of this show, I found myself really confused on how to gauge both of those teams, given how like very one-sided a lot of their playoff series went in the LCK and the LCS, right? Like they have weaknesses. I'm sure they do, right? Like, but we haven't necessarily seen in at least a series, a full-on series, their weaknesses be exploited, right? So like, there's a world where I think if they were going to end up at MSI and they ended up either against each other or they ended up against other teams, that we see them take first game because like there's not something in the playbook, right? There's very, very few games that you can point to if you're Reaper or if you're the coach T1 that you can go, okay, here's how this team beat Cloud9 or here's how this team beat T1. Like, let's do that, right? Like let's try to do that and like really hit at this one weakness. I'm sure those exist, but I do think that there's a little bit of almost this element of surprise that would exist at an international team. We'll see if that's the case by the time Worlds runs around, and these two likely end up there at this point, right? But like, I think there's a little bit of an element of surprise of like you have such a small sample size of when they're vulnerable that you don't know what makes them sort of like shatter, right? Like what makes their armor break. But I would find a T1 C9 series really interesting because it's really about, you know, like play out game one slow, see what mistakes are made, and then really put the pedal to the metal on those mistakes in the following game, or clean them up if you're the team that loses, right?
I actually think C9 matches up amazingly well with T1. I think if they played in groups, it would go 1-1. I think T1 is the best team in MSI. I think C9 matches up with them really, really well. And I think that what would happen is that I think T1, if you play them, if you don't snowball them early and continue that snowball, you will most likely lose. Because if you get to the mid game and it's a 1K, 2K gold lead, they will find a mistake that you make and they will end you. Where I think C9, what they would do is I can see Blabber and Niski rolling down bot lane and making Teddy's life hell and not letting Teddy breathe and not letting Teddy get to the late game where when he gets to the late game, he's the best player in the world. I actually really do like the C9 T1 matchup. Not saying that C9 would beat T1 in the best of 5, but I definitely think that C9 could take a game or two off of T1 and push them to the limit. I actually think C9, especially of Reaper, I know Reaper, he actually talked about this. Reaper was on on Core JJ's YouTube channel talking about SKT versus Gen G and what was the weakness of SKT or T1. And he basically said that you have to snowball them early. You have to knock them out incredibly fast or this team is unstoppable late game. there's no two players that you would want in a late game scenario more than Teddy and Faker. Those two in the late game are unstoppable. Teddy is the best late game carry in the world. He knows what to do past 35 minutes. He's unstoppable. Faker, he's done it time and time again. The most clutch player in League of Legends history. One of the most clutch players in esports history. So, well, I think Reaper and Coach Kim of T1 are, in my opinion, the two best coaches of the tournament. I think both of them are brilliant minds. I actually would really like to see that series because I think it'd be very close. Even though I think T1, as you will see, is the strongest team at MSI, I do think C9 matches up with them really well, and that's a matchup I'm really hoping we see at Worlds, because if T1 doesn't diversify their style and they continue playing this classic counter-punchy T1 style that has been exploited by teams who can pick weird things and kind of mess up what they think is the norm, it could be a really close series. The reason why Gen G got rolled in the finals is because Gen G is a standard team. They like to play late game carries. They like to play a very standard way. They like to pick standard picks, very straightforward style. C9, on their hand, they'll play anything, and they will play balls to the wall, and I would love to see that series. But yeah, C9 versus T1, very close. And
keep going with that, Tyler, as we take a look at your semifinal brackets. Even on the other side, not T1, just take us through how we got to your final here.
So yeah, but hypothetically, T1 and should play C9 in the semifinals, but since at MSI the top seed gets to pick either between the third seed or fourth seed, I actually think T1 would pick G2. Not because I think T1 thinks C9 is better than G2. I think it's just because they want revenge. I think T1 and Faker especially, they got eliminated by G2 at both MSI and Worlds last year. I think they would like to make a statement, and I think they would so. I actually think that G2 has looked really shaky at times, and Caps in the bottom lane versus Teddy, I give a gigantic edge to Teddy. I don't think G2 would be able to disrupt SK or T1 in the early game enough to actually push them out of their get them out of their comfort zone. I think T1 would take that series. And the other series with JDD and C9, I think Kanavi would shut down Blabber. I think Blabber's a very good player. I've said it many times, I think Blabber's a world-class player, but Kanavi this season has been absolutely incredible. His Kindred's the best in the world. Zoom, while he didn't have the best LPL final, I still would say he's the best top player in the world currently, especially with the Shy inting like every other game, where the Shy just kind of, the Shy always ints. The Shy will always have a game where he goes 0-7.
He had a raw playoff.
Yeah. The Shy is known to have, every 5 games, he's just going to int, and just die 20 times on Kennen. But he was really
But it
rough.
happened
Sounds like me
every
and Valorant.
game. Every game.
Notice though, my bracket is the exact same, but it's because JDG would pick Cloud9. Not because T1 would pick Cloud9. But I think regardless of the outcome here, I think that the bracket that Tyler and I have, JDG, C9, G2, T1, that would be what would happen in the end, right? Like, I think that would be the semifinal bracket, regardless of how it shakes, whether it's T1 advances 1 and picks G2, or if it's JDG advances 1 and picks C9. I think that those are the teams that would want to face one another.
I also think if G2 ended up number 1, they might just pick T1 if T1's 3rd or 4th, because I think G2 thinks they know they could beat T1.
I think that there's a resounding... I think there's a resounding feeling,
I think
actually.
Would face them in the finals, honestly. Like, I think you're giving way too much credit to these teams for picking for, like, rivalry and not picking for, like, a team that they're definitely going to beat in semifinals.
I would rather play Faker in the semifinals than play him in the finals. There's only been one. Look at the international final losses Faker has, or his final losses in general. He's lost, what, 3 major finals in history? He lost EDG final, where EDG had to pull out the Morgana trap card to be his unbeatable LeBlanc. We had the BDD with Longju Gaming, his only LCK final loss, which I think was more on an overall team dynamic than Faker being beaten. And then the classic 03 2017 final loss in China, as we all know, the Malzahar massacre that night was, where Crown just played Malzahar 3 times and did not let Faker play, League of Legends. If I was G2, and I know I actually do
Yeah,
agree
but
with you,
you're
Emily.
leaving out
I
all
do.
of the places where T1 lost last year in the semifinals.
That's what I'm
Somebody-
talking about.
somebody-
They lost the semifinals
No,
because
so
G2
you're
beat
saying
them in the
that T1
semifinals.
is more vulnerable in the semifinals than they
Yeah.
are in the finals.
I would rather, if I was
Faker's
G2,
clutch
I'd
gene
rather play
activates
them
in the finals. Okay,
I would
Faker's,
rather-
that's what you're
Tangy,
saying.
Tangy Sauce in our chat, I believe this is what he was saying, is G2 is 8-3 against SKT historically, by the way.
But what are...
Play
But
them
see, I
from-
wouldn't. That's why I don't
That's
think
not in the finals,
T1,
yeah.
Yeah, that's
No,
why
this is in general.
if T1 is coming out first, I don't think they're picking G2. That's why. Like,
Do you think
that's
you
how
think
I
they-
have.
You
I
think they
think
pick
they
Cloud
pick
Nine?
T1.
I think in my
Yeah.
bracket, actually, I might have G2 and T1. Let me see my bracket here. I actually
do
forget who picked in the
I do think
semifinals.
that there's
I don't think they picked G2 for that semifinal.
I would want them to. It's my MSI, Emily. This is my hypothetical anime. This is my
I mean,
MSI
I'm just saying,
where
think
Faker
you
goes
are
on
T1
stage.
credit.
So that's
Taking
my
a
bracket,
team
and
to
I
go up
actually
against them
picked
and eliminate them in the
G2.
semifinals again.
G2 actually picks T1 in my bracket. So
See, I can see
I
that. If you
believe-
have G2 coming out first and having them pick T1,
and
that
the
makes
reason
sense to me.
now the reason, hang on, can I please explain? Give me 30
Yeah.
seconds here. G2 picks T1 because they beat them at Worlds last year, and I agree with what Tyler is saying that Faker's got the clutch gene. So take them out in the semifinal. Don't wait for LeBron James to show up in the final and absolutely decimate you. So that's the bracket there. Now, I have more faith in C9 than all of us, and I will be completely honest in saying that I treated this hypothetical MSI as West League of Legends fan fiction. I treated it like a pro wrestling promoter putting over C9 and G2, making them look strong because that's what the Western League of Legends fan wants. And that's what I want. I want to see a strong Western contingent rolling through the momentum that they had last year, an all-Western final. It's a different North American team, but I could see that. But the other thing I want to say is that we spent the entire LCS season basically not passive-aggressively almost dismissing C9's accomplishments because the rest of the LCS was so bad. And the rest of the LCS was nowhere near the caliber of C9, and that's why they had a dominant season. And MSI was really going to be the first introduction to elite competition for C9. And I could see a path, a world where even in an isolated tournament like this, C9 could perform very well. Even if the odds are against them, I would say that with the talent that they have on that squad, we could have seen a very, call it Cinderella run if you want. I really could have seen a very impressive run. So that's why I picked the way
I think it comes down to Emily's point earlier. It comes down to Blabber, in my opinion. Like, I think he makes or breaks, right? And how other junglers would respond to him at a tournament like this, right? Like, or how they will respond to him at Worlds later on is like, if he's able to get Niski and Licorice on the ball rolling, then yeah, like there's they are a team, as we saw that the way that they like to play in the LCS. C9 is a team that likes to steamroll, right? And they like to snowball. They like to get the momentum really early, using Blabber as sort of that hook to do it. And from there they push forward. And if other junglers are able to starve him out or stop him or counter gank effectively and track his path, then we are looking at a very different competition for C9. We have not seen another jungler do that effectively, truly, in North America, or at least do it with laners or supports who are able to follow up on those plays.
C9.
Oh no, you can go.
I was gonna say that I don't think. Hopefully, Niski would not be offended by this, but I think C9 is like the Walmart version of FPX, where FPX is like the Louis Vuitton, and then you have kind of like the poorer man's version of FPX. Like you can definitely see the FPX and definitely going to be influences in how Niski and the team plays, wanting to snowball bot lane with Blabber and Niski kind of as the cosplay of Tion and Doinby. So I do think they would give trouble to teams like G2 as FPX did, and as FPX did to all teams last year, because it's a very hard style to play against, even though it's one-dimensional at times. But I'm I'm just kind of sad we can't see this. Like this tournament, all 4 teams at the top, I think, are very exploitable, and that makes it a really fun tournament, right? It's not like
exactly.
Samsung White or SKT of old where you'd go into a tournament and be like, okay, 2 teams can win, 1 team can win. I think all 4 teams could win this tournament because I all think all 4 teams are very talented.
Go ahead, Emily. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I want to piggyback on Tyler's budget FPX point, like Walmart FPX. JDG absolutely like took care of FPX in playoffs, so
that's why I have them beating C9 down.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think that's actually why I think C9 would probably again I'm in agreement with Tyler here. I think they'd actually look better against T1 based on playstyle than they would against JDG. I also think the big thing is that a real unsung hero of the C9 lineup who's played weak side, he's played strong side, is an incredibly good top laner, is Licorice. And Licorice I don't think he'd like get destroyed by Zoom, but I do think Zoom would keep him in check better than any top laner I've seen in North America do, right? Because Licorice loses so remarkably gracefully. It's actually insane. People should watch his pro view a lot more, to be honest. I always talk about top laners in pro view, actually, because I'd love to like just comment over Zoom's pro view as well, just his laning. I do think that is where JDG would have the advantage over C9. Additionally, if they got Yagao on something that he's really comfortable with in the mid lane where he can stay in lane, and continuously stay ahead of Niski, especially if he's constantly shoving the wave to turret, keeping Niski in lane, that actually hampers C9 significantly as well. And I can see it as something that JDG would definitely make a point to do.
I think every team of the 4 major regions has something different to prove, right? I think, and that's what would have made this really fun. I think for JD Gaming, it's to prove that the coronavirus effect and how it affected the LPL didn't play in their favor, right? Like I think that
in JDG's favor or in the LPL's favor?
In JDG's favor. I
was gonna say because Zoom wasn't there for like over half the season.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of people who don't see JDG as a legitimate champion. Probably because they are not one of the big organizations of the LPL, right? They're not. FPX is a little different the way that they established themselves, right? But remember, right? Like people question FPX up until that Worlds win anyway, but it's not an
FPX
IG.
Lost to J-Team in the first Dave group.
That was a great day.
Said they were 2015 LGD.
But they're not like this the LPL organization, right? Like they're not the big ones you think of EDG and IG and these teams that have historically been there for a while and have been some of the competitive ones, right? I think that, and I see Kelsey in chat, JD are a massive org, but for non LPL regular viewers, I think that there are a lot of people that do not believe in them. And I think that this would have been the opportunity to prove people that they are worth believing in. In the case
with all LPL teams though, like until you see them, I wrote about this in my paragraph on JDG and our like who won the weekend kind of thing. But I do think this consistently happens with LPL orgs that aren't like Royal Never Give Up or Invictus Gaming or EDG. But I think most people think of EDG as choking at Worlds, like most international fans. So like it's not even that they have like great standing in the West in terms of what they do, because people tend to just forget about the 2015 MSI victory and focus on a lot of their Worlds performances, which haven't been as good as predicted. So I think it's actually really, if they want like Western fan base, I think it's actually really important for a lot of the LPL orgs to get out at these international competitions. JD Gaming though, they are really active on Twitter. A lot of the younger, like quote unquote younger LPL orgs have made it a point to be a little bit more active on Twitter lately.
All right, let's talk about.
I was just gonna say like C9 needs to prove that their steamroll of LCS season is actually legit, right? It's about them being good and not the region being bad, and that the massive investments that management put into it financially were worth it. right? Like Vulcan, very well documented, but the others as well. And getting rid of some of their best players, in the case of Svenskeren and others, was okay, right? It was the right decision. I think that also for G2, they need to prove that this role swap actually makes some goddamn sense. Because there's no chance that you could say it does. After, even though they did end up winning LEC, there are definitely more arguments against Caps playing AD carry than there are in favor of Caps playing AD carry. And then I think for T1 that there's a little bit of, and this is across the entire LCK, what I have gauged from talking to people around, both in the league and out of it, right, is that there's this feeling that like the LCK is a little bit of a has-been. Not the sense that they're not competitive, but they used to be such the dominant brand. And I was talking to somebody about this the other day, and like I said to them that like it used to be cool that you could watch Champions at like 3 a.m. with your buddies, right? Like you were the cool people if you watched it, and there was this sort of like, these guys kick ass, go watch their regular season games, right? And I think that that's lost a little bit of that flavor for the LCK. Not that they're not a competitive region, but they've had 2 worlds where they didn't win, and I think that bothers them a lot. And I think that there's a little bit of favor, a little bit of resounding entire LCK, not just T1, but T1, Gen G, all these orgs. Hey, we want to show that we're still top dog, or that we can be top dog. So I think there was resounding, like every single top 4 team here had something big to prove.
You saw it in their franchising announcement. Like in the paragraph where they're announcing franchising, they're like, we used to be the greatest, and we feel like franchising is going to bring us there again.
I agree that there is the chip on the shoulder and something to prove, but I would disagree that it's not cool to watch at 3 a.m. anymore. They actually just broke records of the Gen G T1 series, had like over 1 million people watching on Twitch and YouTube combined. So, nice. And I also think it goes back to the point of the LPL, right, where, you know, the reason why LCK is big and people watch it as the dominant Asian, cast in the league is because of the old days, right? People are nostalgic about what is old, right? They haven't changed. Like LPL is better than LCK right now, but people still in the back of their minds have this feeling of LCK is the dominant brand. They are still the kings of Asian League of Legends. They're the kings of League of Legends, and which is why
I would argue a lot of people think that the LPL is now the cool league because they've won 2 worlds back to back.
They're the fun league.
To the Western casual audience, who are, the reason why there was 1.3 million plus or whatever was watching on Twitch of the Gen G T1 series, is because they still see LCK as the dominant brand.
But if you ask yourself the question, I want to see the most competitive League of Legends in the world during the regular season, you're probably going to go seek out the LPL, right?
I still think that,
but do you know to seek out the LPL?
I mean,
that's the thing.
Yes. I think so because FPX and
I don't know,
IG
man.
won.
Even T1, after they collapsed at Worlds and lost 3-0, they have Faker and they have the name recognition. People will still watch the Patriots even if they're not making deep Super Bowl runs.
You have to have years after years after years of dominance by China.
Here's a marketing rule. We got to move on, but here's a marketing rule. It takes 8 times to register, hearing something 8 times to register in your head. Think about that and apply it to this argument, right? Someone who's only heard about the LPL once may not even know. Anyway, Jacob, your final. You and I aligned in our final. Give us your predictions and tell us why you picked this winner.
Yeah, so as we said in my semifinal, JDG advances over C9, but close. But JDG loses to G2 in the final. I think that JD does advance out at top on the group stage, but I think that G2, when they click, they're really good. And I think that they, at an MSI, would seek some severe revenge on a Chinese team, and JDG would feel the wrath of what FPX should deserve, and I hope we get to see later in the year. I think G2, when they take things seriously, is not the right word, because I don't want to infer that they didn't take part of the LEC seriously, but when they really buckled down, they are probably the best team in the world, at least up there. And I think that we've seen that potential throughout the LEC spring split. I don't know if that potential is higher or lower, with Perks being at 80 carry versus Caps being at 80 carry, right? Again, that was my biggest question for MSI. But I think that G2, just every player on that team, you can make the argument that they are like definitely top 5 in their role in the world. But certainly for some of them, you could argue even a little bit higher.
Caps?
Well, okay,
Caps?
remove that. You can make the argument.
Don't get me wrong. I love
no.
G2. I love
you
G2
can make-
so much,
you
but
can
I'm
make-
not
sorry,
making the argument
sorry.
that Caps is the best bot laner in the world.
I want to say, okay, you can make the argument that he's one of the best mid laners in the world, or that you could have, right?
Could.
In terms of the previous 2 years on G2 and Fnatic, he is
And
the weak link.
I
He is
also
the weak
think
link
there's an
in his
argument
current role.
as perks for one of the best bot laners in the world. Like I do
Argument
think there's
against?
An argument there. No, for.
Oh,
Like I'm
for.
saying if
Yes.
they were swapped
Yes.
back, I think there's an argument for, but I don't think there's an argument for Caps as the best bot laner in the world.
That's what I like. This is why I'm sad about MSI, because I 100% like if they go there and Caps just gets ran over by Sven and by all the various players of these other teams, right? Like if he gets run over, then you come back and you go, all right, screw this. Perks, go back to bot, right? Like we're gonna run it back like 2019.
Yeah,
right?
I
Like,
agree with Jacob there. I think that if G2 had a bad MSI, that's where we would have seen a permanent change. Or another swap. I think that MSI would have been a good barometer for them to like solidify whatever the summer splits roles would have been. I agree with you, Jacob, on that one for sure.
Jacob, I went through the JDG G2 matchup in my semifinal, but why do you think, why specifically do you think G2 would come out on top?
I think that their synergies are really strong. Again, I was hesitant to make this call because of Caps, specifically because of Caps. But you did mention earlier, and I agree that sometimes Kanavi leaves bot lane alone. And
I mean, sometimes Kanavi leaves everything alone. He's like
True.
lanes.
True. But the teams that we have seen, the teams we've seen beat G2, Mad Lions, right, for example, in the playoff, the teams we've seen beat them and make them look weak are the teams who prioritize making really, cheeky's not the right word, but certainly making a lot of focus onto displacing Caps, right? Like that has been a lot of the win condition. Mickey's a really good support at protecting him. Mickey's usually pretty good at getting vision. But nonetheless, I think if you look at the top side of the map for G2, they're really good. Like every single one of those.
Wonder over Zoom.
Yes, but
I just want to clarify this because I obviously disagree, but
Zoom God.
I think Zoom's great. But I think that Zoom. I think that Wonder Yankos is better than Zoom Kanavi.
They have better. I would say they have better communication. I don't know if I would say we're better, I would say communication-wise.
I don't know if you can make the argument. You certainly can't make the argument that the bottom lane of G2 is better than the bottom lane of JDG, right?
I think with
to make that argument.
I think with JDG, one of the things I think they've come out ahead of G2 on, again, I think it'd be a really close series. I think there'd be probably a lot of fighting, especially if we're going by JDG of most of the season and with Zoom and not JDG of finals. But I actually think that and one of the reasons why I've had a little bit more faith in them than top esports is I actually think their late game team fighting can be really, really good. Very, very well coordinated. If, Zoom isn't messing up TPs. So I actually think that they could beat G2 there as well, in my opinion, because I think Caps, when I look at his strengths, on a more traditional AD carry pick, and again, a lot of this will probably also come down to draft, and JDG's draft is not something I have a lot of confidence in, would be that I think I do think that he sometimes falters in team fight positioning as opposed to other things that we see him be really, really good at, just minion wave management and when to hit turret, when to back off, that kind of thing, back timing, stuff like that. I think as a bot laner specifically, where I sometimes see mistakes is sometimes in the team fight micro on traditional carries, and I think that's actually also where JDG are surprisingly well coordinated, especially if they can scale Kanavi up as a carry. I think Graves would have to be permabanned against JDG for sure.
I think that Kanavi is not very. I think Kadavi has a very high ceiling that he is yet to reach in his career.
I agree with that, actually.
I think that he has the potential to be maybe the best juggler in the world. Certainly, in that conversation one day, right? Like, this is a player that we saw. There was a reason there was so much dispute over what happened with him and Griffin. It's because there were a lot of people that believed in him, right? Like, really thought that he had the potential to be fantastic, like way better than what he was being given credit on the JDG team last year, right? When he was on the low. I think that
he was good last year. He was really good.
No, I know, but JDG wasn't that good last year. And I think that
they were
average.
Yeah. They almost made it to Worlds. They just lost
they made a final.
IG.
They were above average.
Jackie Love basically dragging the carcass of IG into
but my point being is that, like, he's there because they think he's really good. I think he's really good. I think that he has potential to be fantastic. I don't think he's there. I don't think that he's there yet.
Okay.
So, as of right now.
Speaking of giving credit where credit is due, let me show you my bracket really quick. I did not have C9 winning. G2 does win in my fictional MSI, but I think this is a good thing for C9. First of all, it's a great thing for the West. You have an all-West final, G2 and C9. I went through the reasons why I even have C9 this far in the tournament previously. Feel free to flame me in the chat. Totally cool. G9 wins, or G9.
G9.
I'm stuck
G9.
on...
You're just combining them as like the ultimate Western.
Just like our Rocket League, the Brawl
team.
Invitational, we had Cloud 2, members of G2 and Cloud 9.
See, their names go so well together.
It just got stuck in my head there. So the reason G2, in my opinion, defeats Cloud 9 here is I've seen enough from G2. They've been through some challenges this split, but they still came out on top. And they had to go through the losers bracket in the playoffs to do so. And C9 hasn't had that level of adversity yet in this dominant phase of theirs. So I do believe that G2 has that more championship mentality to be able to pull it off. And I do think they are a better team on paper than C9 is. But what I like about this is that this would be C9's first MSI in this era, in this dominant era, right? Remember, Team Liquid's first MSI in their dominant era, they placed 5th, right? So I feel like C9, let's just assume that this were to happen. I feel like C9 would have a wealth of momentum, and they would actually consider this a win, a positive, a net positive going to MSI and reaching this kind of result. So they would still have some sort of momentum, even if they lost. Yeah, sure, it would sting to lose, but at the end of the day, they accomplished something great so soon at an international tournament like this, and I think it would carry over to summer. They would make Worlds and possibly make it out of groups at Worlds because of what they learned in this tournament. So I feel like this is the correct result, and they would still give G2 a little bit of a fight there, but at the end of the day, it's Carlos and the boys raising another MSI trophy. So that's what I had there, but let's move on to Tyler. Tyler, you and Emily align in terms of which region of the world will dominate at MSI. Take us through your final.
I think we have the same final, but we have a different
winner. We have different winners.
So we can both discuss it now that me and Emily both have a JDD versus T1 final. I have T1. She has JDG. I think it'd be a really good final. I think my thing of JDG is that if I'm at T1 and I'm looking and I'm like, please give Yagao, Kasten, give him the Azir, give him the LeBlanc. Let's go late game. I don't think let Kanavi, ban Graves, ban his early game champions, make it go late, have it to go to the late game, and then when it comes to the late game and it's 35 minutes, it gets to the 40-minute mark. Both teams are very good at team fighting, but at the end of the day, if you get to that point, I will always bet on Faker and Teddy over every team in the world. Give me those two players in a late game situation, and I have those two players winning the tournament. I don't think JDG has enough to disrupt them early game and to push them in the early game and to disrupt the bot lane to get Teddy off his feet to beat them in a 5-game series. Emily obviously does, so let's hear why she thinks JDG.
So I actually don't think they're gonna touch Teddy at all. Like I think they're just gonna kind of leave Loken and Lumao to kind of do their thing in the bot lane. Throwing it out there, Lumao has a lot of weird disruptive support picks.
He's a very good support.
He can pull out. He just had probably the greatest Bard play that's ever been seen in like professional League of Legends history. I'm not even kidding. If you just want to see one highlight from the LPL final, watch Lu Mao, which like subsequently won him the MVP. That, and I think his Thresh game was really, really good as well. But the way I think JDG can beat T1, and I don't think this is like a definite thing, right? Like I definitely think T1 could win. I think there actually is honestly a legitimate argument for all four of these teams. The way that JDG beat T1 is, I think, by attacking topside. And I think that if you do try to ban out a lot of Knavi's, like farming carry junglers.
Rek'Sai.
I mean, even I'd put Kindred in there too. Not that she's like a super power pick, but you might just want to take it off the table since Knavi's so good at it. And they know how to play around it. Or you can attack Yagao in the mid lane. But anyway, I think the way GG win is by attacking topside. I think the trick to beating T1 is not only attacking them early, but not focusing on destabilizing bot. Instead, you focus on destabilizing jungle and top. And I think that JDG are actually in a unique position where they'd be able to do that. So I think based on, again, like a lot of this is based on what I saw from JDG in season and not necessarily in finals, because I do think in certain respects their finals are very atypical of what we saw for a lot of reasons. I think this is a team that can have an incredibly formidable early game. And despite the fact that they will make mistakes because they are dumb, especially in the mid game, I think that they are the type of team that can get an early game snowball, especially topside, to be able to beat a team like T1. I think it'd be close. I think it'd be a 3-2, but that's why I would pick JDG.
I do agree that Zoom and Knavi could definitely disrupt Kana, who has improved leaps and bounds in the spring split. Went from basically not, he was just a trainee to getting a chance because Roach wasn't playing well to being the full-fledged 100% starter, the future of the T1 top lane. And if there's one guy in the world that I'm going to trust, to coach up a top laner at an international event, it's going to be Coach Kim, the top lane kingmaker, the Shy, the Guri, Kuve, when they went to the World Finals, Khan. He has taken pretty much every top laner he's touched is a top 10 top laner in the world. Even on Dignitas, he had Someday. Like every player that Coach Kim has come across as a top laner has become God. So I'm not saying Kana can stand up to Zoom currently, but I'm saying in a best of 5 series, I trust Coach Kim in that situation that he could mask Kana's weaknesses. But I still think it would be a pretty close series either way. I think both teams are very good, and I think all 4 teams could win this championship. I just think T1, for me, is the most consistent and the one that I would bet my money on.
So those are our brackets for a hypothetical fictional MSI if it were to happen. Those are our thoughts on how it would have unfolded. Let's end on this. Worlds still scheduled to happen. We don't know how. We don't know too much beyond that. But we talked a lot about which regions we feel to be strong here. We talked about which teams we feel to be strong here. Let me ask this, because we talked about it previously. How much of the teams that we spoke about today, including our winners of MSI here, G2 and T1 and JDG, how competitive do you think they will be when Worlds does come around? Emily, let's start with you.
I think all of these teams will probably represent their region at Worlds. I mean, actually, interestingly enough, the one I have the least faith in is JDG. And that is because if anyone watches the LPL will know, like, the LPL is full of really good but hyper-specific teams in terms of play style, right? So, like, they will int draft to get their really specific team compositions, play really specifically how they want to play a lot of the time, or, sometimes they'll just int draft for no reason. And so, actually, it's really important that JDG got these championship points, despite the fact that they are lowered for spring split, because you can see a world where even some of the teams that didn't make playoffs at all this year in LPL could make a deep run in playoffs come summer if they manage to come together. Like, I think, like, I know a lot of people don't have faith in Vici as an org, but like I think their team looks good. I think you could look at WE as a team and might be able to turn it on in summer. I think you could even look as far as to say like BLG would be able to do something similar. So
Team Fufo.
I mean, there's like a lot of teams in LPL that could actually make a run, and that's not even including talking about the FPXs, the IGs, the RNGs, the EDGs. So
Who's he gonna play?
Yeah, is EZI gonna play? He's still injured as far as I know. But I think these are all things to consider when you look at LPL. So it's actually funny. I think C9 definitely, G2 definitely, T1 definitely. JDG I think is actually in the shakiest position, and it's only by virtue of the way the LPL works and how many really strong teams there are, like, but hyper-focused teams, if that makes sense.
I would agree with that. I think that JDG will still qualify for the World Championship. I don't think that their performance dips that badly. I'm not sure that they would be the best team coming out of the LPL in September. Right? Like I think they may not be the number 1 seed coming out of the LPL in September, right? Because I think there are teams that will be progressively better that are already pretty good, right? That are of top. I think there are some teams, eStar, Top Esports, etc., too, who like may figure out what went wrong for them towards the end of this spring split.
Definitely eStar. I don't know, but
Yeah, eStar.
They were so
I love
promising,
eStar,
eStar.
by the way.
They were so promising.
But that's what makes the LPL fun, right? Is that there are a lot of teams that on any given day could be competitive, right? Like the 3 that we just mentioned are not Fun Plus Phoenix, the reigning world champion, right?
Yeah.
And like there's nothing stopping FPX from like getting better.
Is
Right?
there?
Like, I think that there's a world where even they get better and are competitive once again.
It
But-
depends on Khan and if they can
Yeah.
find.
I agree.
Is
I
there-
actually I think he's a terrible. I think he's. I could go on Emily's show and talk about this for a long time, but nonetheless, like I think Khan's a terrible fit for FPX, and I think that they spent way too much money to get him. But like,
Hey, man.
I don't think that means
Not
that
much.
FPX can't be a good team again, or like one of the best teams in the LPL again.
Is there a
but
world where FPX doesn't qualify for Worlds?
Of course.
Yes,
LPL 's
100%,
Super.
100%.
If Uzi
Wow.
comes back and then RNG just does RNG things where they just play around, like Emily said, if RNG just goes super bot lane focus of Uzi again, they can make worlds. If the Shy learns how to play League of Legends again outside of playing Hearthstone, like the Shy is, I still think like mechanically the Shy is still the best player in the world, but
I
the
do have
man,
to figure out their jungle problems too.
The man-
Like, there's
They
there's
look
3
good
teams.
with Leon.
There's 3 teams here who didn't do so great in the spring split, who could like magically flip the switch and like be good. I don't want to make it sound that easy, but like FPX, IG, or RNG, given or depending on what happens in the next 4 weeks or 5 weeks, like could be very good in summer, right? Like depending on what happens with them. So I think that realistically here, right? Like there's a world where the LPL summer competitive split looks very different than the spring split. But I do think I have enough faith in JD Gaming that they would make it out and make it and qualify for Worlds. I just can't say with any amount of confidence that they would be the best team coming out of China to compete on the world stage.
Last question to Tyler. Tyler, do you think NA makes it out of Worlds this year?
what do you mean out of worlds? Are they banned
Sorry, out of
from
groups.
Worlds?
Out of
Or so
groups. Sorry.
that-
Does NA
Yeah.
make?
Yeah,
Does,
C9 will make it out of groups. I would be.
do you think C9 makes it out of
hilariously
groups?
I'd be hilariously disappointed if C9 doesn't make it out of groups. I don't think right now, unless TSM or Team Liquid like up their game a bunch, they will make it out of groups. I think C9 is a safe bet if they don't get a super group of death where they get, because now that LPL and Europe have 4 seeds, there's a chance where C9 gets put in a group with Gen G and a returning Uzi RNG, and then it just becomes a super group of death where it's like, okay, have fun with that. Where
That's unlucky.
hey, C9 got out of a group before with Gen G and RNG with Uzi, so it's not impossible.
Yeah.
And this is a better team than they had that made the semifinals. But I just kind of want to shine a light on why NA is going down and why China is now the deepest region by far in the world. If you look at the Chinese minor league system, the LDL, how many teams would you guess are in the LDL? I mean, NA has 10 academy teams? The LDL, the minor league system of China, of LPL, has 25 freaking teams. They have 25 full-fledged minor
some of
league
them dropped out because of coronavirus.
Yeah.
And they take risk.
Yeah.
Like this is what I like about it's the benefit of this is the whole pitch for franchising, right? Is that we can franchise so you don't have to worry about being relegated, and we can take a flyer on that random support that played in the LDL, right? Who we thought would be good, and then he turns.
You guys have come around to loving the LPL. That's all I'm saying.
Well, no, I'm just saying I commend them for their trainee system and their scouting, because it's at the point where because the LPL is franchising, your spot's not in jeopardy every single year, right? They are doing what the LCS and the LEC said they would do. The LEC has done it more effectively than the LCS. The LCS hasn't done it for nothing, right? It's awful in North America, because they're not other than Cloud9, they are not investing in trainees at this point, right?
My final statement on the show will be, I would be very happy to see Team Liquid of Tactical make it to the World and to make it out of the group stage. That would make me very happy.
Can you imagine if that happened?
I think Tactical
would be considered the best,
oh my
best
word.
new coach ever.
Tactical and Jat, the NA duo. I Tactical and Jat, baby. TL fans can take down their double up posters, put up pictures of Tactical and Jat, go to bed sleeping, mighty fine, dreaming of that beautiful World's trophy with Jat. They're
just gonna put Jat's face on the trophy, exactly.
If Jat leads Team Liquid to the World title this year, I will build a gold statue of Jat. I will commission a statue of Jat to be built.
I will drape the Canadian flag on it just for him. I will drape.
I mean,
you better, Tyler, like your pink hair date with Avali and post quarantine. I think you're gonna have to learn how to chisel and smelt some gold, my dude. Tactical and Jad are coming for you.
That's it. Tactical and Jad are coming for you. Well, that's it for us here on the Rift Rewind. It's an ESPN Esports League of Legends show. Normally, we're on every Tuesday, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We're gonna have some fun stuff planned for you as we await the summer seasons. And then we will look forward to giving you all the analysis, breaking down matches, and previewing what is to come. We have plenty of content here on twitch.tv/ESPN Esports. If you're not following us already, please hit that follow button. We have programming pretty much every single day, even outside of League of Legends. Lots to consume, lots to enjoy. For my three counterparts, thank you very much for joining us here on the Rift Rewind. And congratulations to G2 on winning MSI.
Cool chat.